Trustee alternate Deborah Sargent.
Here.
Trustee Kyle Mays.
Here.
Trustee Jan Price.
Here.
We have no representative from MUD 39 tonight, unfortunately. Trustee David Smith.
Here.
Trustee Hugh Connett.
Here.
Trustee Bob Lux is here. Trustee Paul Martin.
Here.
Very good. We have a quorum. We'll begin with our invocation, pledges of allegiance. Heavenly Father, we come to you today as an assembled body. We humbly request that you bless our meeting, our community, and our nation. Help us to work diligently, always for the common good and in the best interest of those we have been elected to represent. Guide us to be insightful and prudent in our intentions, visions, plans, deliberations, decisions, and their fulfillment. Work through us to provide a spirit of welcome for all in attendance, to engage in respectful and thoughtful dialogue and discussion with understanding, wisdom, and humility. Amen.
Amen.
If you wish, prior to reciting the pledges of allegiance, please take an additional moment of silent prayer or additional reflection in the manner of your preference. Thank you. Before we proceed with the pledges of allegiance, I'd like to also have an additional moment of silence and thought for the passing of Bruce Cunningham. Those of you who may or may not know Bruce, most people in this room did. He was both a MUD 6 director for years. He was on the board of trustees for years. He also, was a hometown hero, United States Army war veteran, and a all-around community servant, and a friend to all. And he passed to his eternal reward on February 6th. So if we could just think about Bruce for a minute and the wonderful things that he did for not only WWA, but also the community. Community's lost a real advocate. Thank you. Pledge of allegiance to the United States of America. I pledge allegiance to the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Texas flag.
Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to the Texas, one state under God, one and indivisible.
Hey. We have some comments from customers from comments from the public. Mr. Kent Maggart, good evening, sir.
Good evening. I'm going to repeat. I went to the Tennessee River Authority board meeting, first one after we got a new general manager. And basically, this is what I told this wastewater treatment project under his wing, and basically take responsibility for it now that he's the general manager. And what I gave him was, number one is this memo that you all got a year ago. And I remember the very last sentence here, basically, this was a defense of why their plant was going to cost at that time $153 million. And Conroe just built one and finished it in 2021, and theirs was $60 million, same size plant. And then you may recall that there was another presentation by the River Authority, and Woodlands Water had the excerpt, and actually was in our on our website, that they repeated or published the impact article. 3 months later, this, their estimate was 226 million. 3 months later. I don't know where that number came from, but they actually made a big presentation since February. And then that was on our constituents. And then we all decided, most of you were at that meeting, I think it was the first week in December. And now we have a new number that's estimated at 288 million. So, having reviewed a lot of presentations, made a lot of in my career, if you got any management oversight, somebody ought to say, well, wait a minute, where are these numbers coming from? And just as you know, if you go to 288 million, the sewer portion of the average person that they presented is going to go up by triple. One other interesting thing I was thinking about, this plant's going to process 3 million gallons per day. If it wasn't for the additional revenue from the other two plants, sewer bill for, if you end up built this freestanding and only had the people supplying it, the sewer portion of the water bill would be $250 a month to pay for $300 million wastewater treatment. The only reason it gets down to triple what it is because we got revenue from plant 2 and plant 3. So the reason I'm here tonight is hopefully that there will be a pause, and I know there's a lot of talk about, as the point I made is you've got a plant that's meeting at TCQ specs for BOD just discharge way below the required maximum. So I've yet to hear anybody tell me the reason we need to replace it is not because it's old, because this piece of equipment could break, and this could break, and maybe that there's a way to extend the life of the old plant rather than spending who knows what. Now we got 3 numbers in a year, actually 9 months, 53. And what's interesting is I just want to make a comment about experts. At this time, SJR must lean on the industry experts. And there's no question about expert, what that means, but I want to point out, most of you are all familiar with the DFC at San Fino, John Williams.
LSGCD.
Yeah, but anyway, we had a DFC defined by experts of 62.5 million acre feet per year. That was the recommended withdrawal. And we built a $500 million surface water treatment plant, which I actually agree with. And we got a new board up there that got elected, and they hired another expert. And now the number is 115 million or 1,000 acre feet per year. And all of a sudden, we don't need any surface water treatment plant expansions. So you got 2 quote experts. So hopefully we don't need an expert. It'll just take some common sense to decide where we're going.
Thank you, sir. Okay, Stephanie Zertucci. Good evening, Stephanie.
Stephanie, and I'm from Mud 7, but today I'm going to just be a resident of the Woodlands. Some of you all know Dr. Gaynor currently represents the upper watershed. The regional flood planning group. The Woodlands is in the upper watershed. He recently decided he's going to step away from that position, and that's going to leave a hole for representation for the Woodlands. And so, in discussing with him who would be maybe a good fit for the next representative, we decided we were talking, and it's gonna be somebody who's very well connected, somebody who has the experience with high damage projects, flood reduction projects, and also somebody who has the network and understands how to facilitate the funding for these projects. So I thought of Imelda Diaz. She recently retired from the flood control. She was there for over 20 years and was the director of engineering. Her duties were to facilitate funding, and she has relationships with GLO, EPA, all the various entities that are very critical in trying to get funding for these various projects. So as of now, the Regional Flood Planning Group has identified the need, and so the next person really needs to take these projects and get funding for them, use their connections, see what's out there and try to move these projects forward. She lives within the upper watershed, and so hopeful that you guys can take a look at her resume and get an endorsement. We do have an item on the agenda, number 11. I think, Bob, you've spoken with her.
So Dana is new.
Yes. It's, we'll talk about it in 8, okay? Thank you. If there's more, Stephanie, if you'd like to stay around, perhaps if you care to, maybe you can be helpful if there's additional information that's required. Thank you very much. I believe that takes care of the requests to address the board from the public. Okay, we'll move to our agenda item number 4, our Region H update. Arthur Bradahall. Good evening, Arthur.
Trustee members, senior staff, and the public. We had a Region H meeting on February 7th. We're here to report out 4 to 1. One of the administrative items that we do each year, we update our alternate that will support Region H for this appointment. Eric Peterson has graciously said he would be our alternate. So he's on the list. If I can't make a meeting, Eric will represent us. We want to always make sure we have our representation at the meeting. I think it's important. This meeting was really technical, and on your G drive, we have the meeting packet, which contains the agenda, and we have the technical memo. I'm going to try to keep this report brief, especially since it's Valentine's Day. I know you guys all want to get home. I do too. But we covered a couple key areas. In the technical memo, we discussed population. What are the population demands for the report? What are the water demands? Source availability. And then we also worked on our budget tasks. Now we have a $1.1 million budget provided by the state of Texas through the Texas Water Development Board. And we had to outline all the tasks, and that's in our packet. You'll see all the different strategies and tasks that we're working on with our consultant. And we're about just shy of 900,000 that we allocated. And we're presenting that to the Texas Water Development Board. We have a reserve of 200,000 if additional tasks come up between now and the end of the planning cycle. But in our discussion, one important thing came up. As you may know, industry is a large group of Region H, and that's a lot along the Ship Channel and other places in the 15 county area. The industry group brought up that they're working on carbon capture and carbon neutral strategies. And what was interesting about that, they emphasized to the group, these strategies take a lot of water demand. So the group asked ourselves the question, are we planning for this in the 26 to 31 planning? And the answer really was no. So these strategies have been moved forward to be part of the 26 to 31 plan that we're working on now. And we allocated funds for these strategies to take a look at. I think it's important. We didn't want to wait to the next 5 year to work on the 32 to 35, 36 planning cycle. But carbon neutral strategies are going to become more and more important. I can tell you from a shipping side, shipping is working on a lot of carbon neutral strategies that by 2030 and 2050, the global ships that sail around the world delivering product to us, will work on all alternate fuels that will be carbon neutral. So it's very interesting. It's now coming in to the water planning cycle, and we're going to hear more about it. So that was an insightful learning that came out of the meeting. Another insightful learning, and we'll share back with you, that the Texas Water Development Board shared with the group without a lot of data, that if you had a project that you concluded in 2018, a water project, and this is an average across the state, if you took that same project and you moved it into 2024 and you executed that project, whatever that cost in 18 was, you're going to see costs rise by 50%. And they said a lot of those impacts to that rise deal with logistics, cost of supply, and what's even more important is less talent around to execute a project, and there's less companies around to undertake these projects. So just from that, I learned if the more you delay projects, it's not going to become cheaper, and it may be challenging to find supplies on time, to keep the project on time, and also to find a vendor that can move the project forward. We're also hearing that organizations are paying a premium to get a vendor to change their rotation list of what projects come first. So if you want to get on a list, organizations are paying a premium to get on that list. So that was some of the learnings that came out of the meeting. We're looking at population. Population is projected by 2030 for Montgomery County alone to be just shy of 760,000 people. That's a revision from some of the earlier projections that had population at 785,000. But that's a big growth between where we are today, about 650, to where we're going to be by 2030. If you want to look really out by 2080, it's projected to be about 1.3 million people in Montgomery County. So these are some big population leap forward. And with that, you know what comes next is water demand. What do we need to do for water? Well, it's projected that in acre feet per year, that by 2030, we're going to need at least 141,000 acre feet for water demand, according to what's been presented to us so far. Source and availability is pretty flat between now and 2080. Based upon what currently is available as sourcing. That doesn't take into account for Montgomery County if SJRA executes on the rights that all of us approved with the Trinity River and bringing pipelines down here to bring more water. What also came out in the meeting is that two other items are going to be very important in planning and very important in actual execution. Reuse of water is being looked at more and more, and also conservation. In this community, we've been on the forefront of conservation, and we've seen the benefits of what conservation has done for us as far as demand of water. There's communities out there that have no conservation today, but will have to start conservation. But even if you approve conservation today, it's not an instantaneous effect. It takes probably 8 years for a lot of this to really have some benefit. But in the planning cycle, we're looking at conservation and we're looking at reuse of water. And we're looking at the reservoir sourcing. Lake Conroe for 2030 is estimated to be at about 80,000 acre feet by 2030. We're also looking at what is the impact to all reservoirs and rivers on silting. The state wants that now as a factor in the water plans because that impacts the availability of fresh water, where before that wasn't looked at. And that's kind of the highlights. The meeting was really technical on all of these areas. That's why we have the details in the packet. But I just wanted to kind of cover some of those highlights of some of the hot button numbers that impact where population's going, where's the source of water, and what's that impact on demand. It's the great thirst. Within that availability of water and the demand, things are changing as far as irrigation goes, mining, farming, in some of these different counties in the region. So there's shifting going on in all those categories. But in this area, demand for manufacturing for water is not gonna go down, it's gonna go up. We gotta take a look at what's the impact of irrigation, but it's gonna be more demand for the population side, people side, versus maybe agriculture, which is shifting more out of this county as it becomes more urbanized and more suburban.
Thank you, Arthur. Speaking on behalf of this board, we really appreciate your representation at Region H and then coming and letting us know this myriad of things that are being discussed. It's quite insightful.
Thank you.
Thank you for
I appreciate
your-
It's an honor to represent this group and be part of Region H. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, we're now to the consent agenda, which will be pages 1 through 13 of the meeting packet, as well as the wage rates on the which were on the Google Drive, I believe. So I didn't have in my review, I didn't have any questions. Anybody have any questions regarding the consent agenda?
So there's one observation on page 9 that it's probably an appropriate time to talk about it. Regarding the cash balance and whether any refunds are necessary or more cash calls are necessary.
Yes, the ending cash after the final audit was completed was $1,237,000. The 1 to 2 month range is from $1,072,000 and $2,145,000. So it falls within the range and no cash calls necessary this year.
And the audit report has been completed and filed, so that's a requirement also before this decision is made. So other than that, I move to accept the consent agenda as presented.
We have a motion, do we have, and we have a second from Trustee Price. Further discussion on this matter? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstain? Abstain. Thank you, ma'am. Motion passes. Shelley, I don't know if you got it then, Trustee Sargent.
On the whole thing, you've seen.
Meetings, I can't vote on the minutes.
That's one of the 3 items.
Okay. We are through the consent agenda, and now we are to agenda item 8. Review and consider approval of the district's fiscal year 2023 audit report. Trustee Wilson.
Excuse me. This was approved at the last meeting, subject to some minor changes and Mr. Conant, I think, requested some information about internal controls. The changes that were requested were made. Internal controls, excuse me, the audit committee talked over with the auditor. He had put in something that was, let's say, abnormal to public accounting or to public company accounting, not entity. Well, it's not a public company, it's
Entity.
okay, public entity accounting that we felt didn't belong there. So we took it out and said, we'll talk to Mr. Conant and work it out later. Some report that would be making good.
So
So at that point, we're recommending approvals. It's already done.
yeah. That's the committee's
Correct.
motion. Any further discussion on this matter? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstain? Motion passes. Thank you. Thank you, Trustee Wilson. Receive the regular SJRA Woodlands Division report, including updates on operations, projects, and public outreach. Mr. Meeks, good evening.
We're here to support.
That's what I'm told. So I do have a few things to go over. I know it's Valentine's, so I'll try to make it as quick as possible. The first item is for anybody who was not able to make the welcome reception for Aubrey Spear, our new general manager. There's another one, February 22nd at 11 a.m. Excuse me, at our GNA office in Conroe. So if anybody's interested, just let us know, pass it over to Shelley, and we'll get her all the information. So that's coming in. Any questions from y'all's review on the monthly operations? Nothing really out of the ordinary there, just flushing some wells and putting in some valves, but if you have any questions on those, I can go through them. Yes, sir.
I had a question just on page 20, where you're analyzing the various projects.
Yes, sir.
What's the owner's advisor services? That's, it's the second item on the page here. It's on page, oh, it's our page 20. I don't know what it is.
On 20. I'm gonna ask Dan to come up and help with the owner's advisor. He's been preparing this go. The owner's advisor, what is it?
I just want, what was that?
Oh, yeah, yes.
So the owner's advisor is a consultant that's going to come in and help us throughout the whole engineering, design, construction phases of the wastewater treatment facility. So that's someone that's going to help us come in, make decisions on overall project delivery, and evaluate, is this something that we utilize an alternative delivery method like a construction manager at risk or a progressive design build? What is the best way to procure this project for design and construction? And this first essentially work order or contract with them is going to be doing that upfront work to get us ready for solicitation and procurement of a design consultant, and then also a contractor bring on board early during the design phases. So that is primarily what they're doing. They're also going to help us select technologies on the membranes. There's efforts in the scope for them to take us on tours of other facilities and potentially out of state, going over some areas where the membrane technology is more prevalent. One that we focused on is Atlanta, Georgia, and then Pacific Northwest also. So they're kind of going to be guiding us throughout the entire project as a owner's advisor.
How long a period of time is the 550? What does that give you? A year, 2 years?
That is going to
18
get us through
months?
the end of this year, end of calendar year 24.
It says August of 25. Contractual completion.
So the work order will go through the end of this calendar year, but the contract will go a little bit longer. Each contract, we issue a blanket contract, and then off of that, we issue additional work orders for each
Yeah.
state.
So essentially, the contract is going to be good for the entire project through 2030. And work orders would be issued off of that as we enter into different phases of design and construction.
So where did 550 come from? What was that applied? 550K, is that?
Correct.
And that's for what period?
That
To September?
through the end of calendar year.
Oh, calendar year.
Calendar year 2024.
So, Dan, was this concept in the attendant money, was it included in those budgets, those numbers that were being given back to us?
Yeah, so this first work order is planned to be R&R funded. And then further work orders with the owner's advisor is rolled up into the bond funding and also into that 289 million total project cost that has been referenced.
Was this role, did you use this kind of role when GRP was built?
We did. We had, they might have called them more program managers at the time, but there was kind of overarching owner's advisor, program manager consultants that came in and helped us throughout that entire project.
Do these guys specialize in this?
Yeah, so I don't think it says on here, but the consultant we have selected is Carollo Engineers. They are widely known across the country for doing these type of services and helping clients through large projects.
One of the big ones that they've been part of is City of Houston's Northeast plant here, the water plant on Lake Houston. That is one that they've helped as like an owner's advisor role on that too.
So the 550 gets you from March to December, 9 months, 10 months worth of work.
Correct. There's a lot of upfront work with them helping us with the procurement, with an alternative delivery technology.
And did you mention the design standards that they'll be involved in developing?
Yeah, so that another piece of it would be, making sure once we get into design, there could be a number of consultants involved in the project. So we want to make sure we are setting upfront design standards. So if different consultants are designing different pieces of the facility, it's all going to tie together and they're going back and utilizing the same standards throughout the entire facility.
And if a project got delayed 6 months, we can't figure out a funding solution in 6 months, let's just say. What would this work be still needed or usable?
So like we said, looking at engineering design standards, developing the procurement packages. The timeline was a change. We may hold on advertising those and soliciting and getting engineers or contractors on board, but the upfront contract language and procurement packages would still be required regardless, along with touring other facilities and helping us through more technical portions of the.
Just to follow up on this timeline issue, I was under the impression that you were coming to this board in March to ask for a yes or no vote on this project.
For the wastewater plant one?
For the infrastructure, yes.
Right, that right now is in y'all's hands and mostly with Eric's with the funding item later on. So we're still hoping for March, latest April, but at this point, we're at your mercy.
I guess my question is, just to follow up, is let's suppose that is a no answer or it's a delayed answer and it doesn't, final answer doesn't come until April, May. Would you be smart in releasing this contract or delaying it until the approval is yes?
The delay, so if the project's delayed 6 months, 9 months, like Dan said, this project still needed, the work done is not wasted funds. If the answer is no, that's more of a question for senior management. Because something has to be done at the plant. There's not a do nothing option. So.
The other aspect is get them under contract and not issue them a work order to start work. It doesn't cost us anything to have them under contract. But it's going to be work that's needed. The other aspects that Sam may have alluded to, as we go further into deciding the delivery method of the project, if it's construction manager at risk, we've got to have someone basically certified on staff or under contract to us to work with the procurement methods. We do not have that expertise on staff.
I see last month you got our approval to hire Cornerstone at 96,000 a year. And now this month we're talking about 550,000. What other surprises are we going to have on consulting firms that are 100,000 or more?
So the owner's advisor was in the project plan for last year. So last March, when we presented, it did include 250, maybe 300,000 for this item. It's at the very bottom of the summary sheet as well as the sheet. Cornerstone was included for roughly 4 months of the fiscal year. And then at the request of the trustees last year, we brought it back at that time. So it was originally going to be for the entire year, but at the request of this board at that time, it was pulled off. And so it was a surprise, but it also was not a surprise because it was a year ahead of schedule.
The question was, how many more, 100,000 or more consulting contracts are we looking forward to in the next 6 months?
I do not know of any surprises. Usually if there's any surprise consulting agreements, it's usually a surprise to us as well, unless you know something.
Nothing that should be surprised. I think one that, and we've talked a lot about, is the AC Waterline Condition-Based Assessment Program. That is something that we plan getting kicked off here, right beginning of April. That's planned for our March tester rate. But we have discussed that with.
So basically, anything that's in the project plan. No surprises other than what's in the project plan for FY 24. Unless there's an emergency. Which we anticipate.
Satisfied, Trustee Martin, with your response on the?
Any other questions on the monthly operation meeting? Hearing none, we're going to move into the budget preparation presentation that will be displayed behind y'all. It's also in your packet beginning on page 27. All right, so this is the first official time we come to y'all with any budget related items. There are no decisions on this item tonight. It's just something that we're bringing to you to tell you that we are starting the process and what we are looking at with these items. So the 4 items we're going to talk about tonight, you can see on your screen, it's basically demand related. It also has the blend ratio discussion as well as O&M expenses. All right, so jumping into it, I am going to move quick, but if you have any questions, just raise your hand or just state it and I'll stop. When we're looking at water demands, we look at 2 to 5 year averages. We also look and say, okay, how much was produced? Production is groundwater production as well as surface water delivery. We look at how much was sold. That's your meters that y'all put into our system and you're invoiced off of. That gets you to water loss. And we also look and say, okay, was that year a dry year? Being a drought year, or was it a wet year, or was it a normal year? For reference, a drought year is typically, we follow the Texas Water Development Board's drought index. For the wet year, we look at anything that's above about 55 to 60 inches per year, and a normal year is about 50 inches of rain. So when you see the screen here, the 2 year average, that obviously includes FY 22 and 23, which were both drought years. So that number's high. Then you get further away from the drought, the number gets lower as you go. So what we're looking at is to recommend to maintain the FY 24 water demands that you can see on your bottom of your screen. So that's 5.5 billion gallons produced, roughly 3 sold, water loss of 5.21. That compares very closely to the 5 year average. And just so you can see it in a graph form on how it compares, the recommended with the dark blue and green is very similar to the 5 year as well. Obviously it matches there. Yes, sir.
Chris, can you explain to me how the water loss gets calculated and why you went with 5.2? You mentioned something really quickly up front, but that's not.
Yeah, not a problem. So we take the production and the sales, the difference between those, and that's your water loss.
No, I get that.
Okay.
But why would you go to 5.2 when you have a 2 year average of 3.8?
So what we do when we do look at the water losses, we look at a 5 year average as well. That's 7.21. Okay. When I look at the 3.48, I believe it, but at the same point in time, it was a drought. So people are using a lot more water. Okay. So I'm trying to explain it easy enough, I guess, to understand. Essentially 5.5 is what we used in the current year that we're in. We also used it, we used 8.5 the year. If I go to 3.84, I'm not entirely sure we're going to make 3.84% water loss. The rolling 12 month at this point in time is 5.5. So I look and say, okay, we're rolling right now at 5.5. I've got a 2 year that shows 3.84, but I know that that number last year was about 4.5%. And so that number isn't staying flat at 3.84. You can see it's coming down. But overall, I'm seeing that trend stay right around the 5-6% range.
So water agency losses came way down with a revision in that calculation, right?
Right.
So shouldn't that kind of reset? I mean, you're picking up several years prior to that, right? Because that's the water sold.
Mhm.
Oh, your water sold, water delivered, right? So I'm just, it doesn't seem like we're taking advantage of what we know when we had an adjustment to the calculation that drove some of the budget this year. Right? We got a big bonus from it, right? And now we're kind of going back, it seems, to an average that has several years when we were using the old water loss numbers. So that's, I'm just trying
We're
to.
holding steady. So if I use the old numbers, we'd be at 8.5 to 9.5%. So the 5.5%, the bottom right, you can see it's 7.2%. So when that shows 7.2, I'm not staying there. I'm hitting 2% lower than that. Let me see, I'm trying to explain it.
Say that again.
The 5-year average is at 7.2%. 2 years ago, when I did the 5-year average, it was at 8.5 to 9.5%. Okay. So looking forward, I'm going to be a little bit conservative because you are talking revenue. So if I drop that number down, the revenue doesn't come in. There's missing revenue, expenses, could be a cash call. So in talking with the audit committee and the trustees of the months last year, we set at 5.5%. 5.5%, 5.2 for any water system in Texas is unheard of. Would you recommend dropping that number?
I'm not you, I'm not the operator. I'm just looking at your 2-year 3.8 average. I'm just wondering, why is that not a good number going forward versus your 5? That's
It's
all.
not truly reflective of the system. You also have to take into account the fire flows. You have to take into account the breaks. You have to take into account the flushings of the wells, everything else that we have going on.
Okay, just asking.
No, I get it. It was a big step for us to go from 8.5% down to 5.5%. That was that big boost you talked about, I think, this year or so. We can look at reducing, and it's a good point to bring this up. Right now, what we're doing is these are recommended as of today. This is the December 31st numbers, right? As we go forward the next 2 or 3 months and develop more of the budget, we're going to evaluate all of this from demands, water loss, and everything else. And if we see a big enough drop or change or increase in something, we'll adjust it when you get to the final budget presentation in April or May.
All right, just want to understand.
Top 3 items that arrived in, just to a negative. What is it?
What do you mean?
Meaning, you know, it increased it from 3 to 7. What's the events that caused the number to go up?
AMI is the number that made it go down, and the lack of AMI made it go up.
MI is what?
Your meters?
Oh,
Automated metering.
Caused it to drop.
Big step change.
No, yeah, it made it drop.
Big step change.
Yeah, big step. And the AMI meters came in at what year point? 2 years ago?
It's within the 2-year average.
Yeah.
So the 2-year average. What's the second item?
That causes
The second driver?
water leaks.
Water leaks. You see any worsening of that?
Third item is just general tank flushing, operational duties. There's roughly 2% of water loss that we can account for. You'll see a big hit in February and March when you are doing your hydrant flushing, because you're going around flushing on your hydrants, and that's a lot of lost water. So general operations of the plant and the facility itself will make that number go up. It's never going to be.
That's done every year, right? The hydrants are flushed every year. You've got leaks every year. There are houses that burn every year. So.
There's also water theft, malfunctioning meters and a lot of things.
So do you think since we've added the 5, we've got 2 years of AMI?
18 months or so. I
So do you
believe.
think that since that has changed, we now are going to have 5 years going forward of AMI use? Has that changed? Been reflected in that number?
No, just the 2 years.
Just for 2 years.
Well, it's inflected in, it's in every single one of them because the 2 years actually a part of every single one of them. That's why that 5 year is not around 8.5%, 9.5%.
What would Houston or some other, Dallas, Fort Worth have for a loss as compared to our 5%?
Double, possibly triple. The Water Development Board does not get concerned until it's about 20% or so. Statewide average is 12 to 15%. So y'all done amazing getting it down to where it is. If we can shave a 0.5% off, we can look at that. But at the same point in time, we do need to make sure we have enough sales to cover the expenses. The questions on water divisions. Next slide. All right, so now we're going to talk about the blend ratio with GRP. On the screen is the rough process high level that is followed. This is more of just a confirmation. A few years ago, the trustees had a committee that reviewed groundwater and surface water blend ratios. I believe a memo and action was taken to maintain at least a 50% and one day go to 65%. So FY23 in this current year 24, we've been at 50%. We plan to stay at 50% unless there is something said along the way to Eric that gives us direction to change that direction at 50% blend to the Woodlands. I will tell you at the same time, that is a recommendation. So the recommendation goes from Woodlands Water. Mike and or myself will take it to the GRP review committee. They vote on it. They could vote up, they could vote down, they could take the 50 and say it's 40. They have that prerogative. From there, we then take it to the River Authority Board, build into the budget. The River Authority Board has the ultimate say on what the actual blend ratio is going to be. At this point, I can tell you, I have figured out the GRP budget with the Woodlands being at 50%. So far, it does work, but I do not have the final say in the case.
So the other members of GRP are at what level?
35%. Well, right now, everybody's at 35% except for the Woodlands, who's at 50%. Next year, blend ratio is recommended to change
For the other entities?
for the other entities.
Do you think it'll be?
It could be recommended at Conroe at 35%, everybody else at 30%.
Why is it going down?
As the county grows, well, the GRP stuck at 13 million gallons a day right now, per the GRP review committee and the board. So as the population grows, that 13 million gallons doesn't get stretched as far. So your percentage is at 50%, but you're actually going to be receiving a little bit less surface water this year. So across the board, everybody's receiving less surface water.
So what is driving the 50 big gallon cap?
The GRP review committee's requirement to keep the expenses of GRP down, since there's no regulatory requirements to have surface water in the county.
You have a huge capital investment. Yeah.
That is a conversation for another day. Does not deal with
I
this.
understand.
Any questions on the blend ratio? All right, so since we're talking demands, on the next slide, we're going to move into sewer. This one's actually a lot less complicated. It's a lot easier, if you will. So what you're looking at is this is the same thing, 2 to 5 year averages for the winter averages that y'all do. The preliminary looking at it, and this will go to the same conversation, I'm sure, the 2-year average is at almost 2.9, 3 years at 2.8. We're recommending to stay where we are at 2.8 billion gallons a year. Now, you are currently doing your winter averaging now, right? It's December, January, February. So in the next few months, we could see that those numbers are going up a little bit. And so if that does cause us to say, okay, it's going to need to be changed, we'll reevaluate that 2.8. But at this point, when we're looking at last year being 2.8, but the 3-year being 2.813, and then it goes down from there, I felt a little bit comfortable at 2.8. Question? So now we're going to start moving into some of the potential impacts of the O&M expenses and answer part of these questions on surprises coming up. We're going to try to tell you about the surprises now. So utilities. What we're going to focus on here is going to be the electrical side. Natural gas is usually less than 10,000 gallons a year or dollars a year. So what you're looking at is a graph of the monthly charges of the electrical for the Woodlands division in its entirety. So at the top, I have the current budget. Below that, I have the rolling 12 months for calendar year 2023. Our direction from senior management and our finance committee is to use the actuals from a 12-month average plus 10%. As you can see, that number is to be determined at this point because we still have a few months to go before we finalize that number. At that point, we'll grab 12 months prior, see what that number is, see if there's anything new coming online, anything old going offline, and then add 10% to it and bring that number back to y'all in the budget.
Why do you add 10%?
I was not in those conversations. I'm assuming
To basically manage the volatility of the market.
So last year we had a discussion around this, conversation around natural gas is what drives electricity prices here in Texas. And we're likely to see electricity come down, which we did. And it's gonna probably happen again. So, and I asked them, what do you use? Is you look at some averages and you get some consultants and you get some, kind of general direction. So in a market that's trending downward, I'm gonna ask, why are you trying to bend it back up?
Are you thinking a deregulated market or a regulated market?
The market we have right here.
Most of our facilities are not deregulated. We're getting power from Entergy,
I know, I work, sure.
so
I'm just asking why you add 10%, that's all.
to ensure that we not coming up short at the end of the year.
So you budgeted $1 million more than your rolling budget is, right? 2.8, the 3.8 versus 2.9, am I reading that right?
Why I'm wondering about the 10%.
Am I reading that right?
Current budget is 3/8. The one we're in through August 31st. That's our budget amount rolling 12 months. At 2.9. We're happy to ask the question. But that's what's been recommended by finance or our accounting group.
And in the 2024 week, well, we don't have enough time, so.
Correct.
Well, actually, the month starts in September.
Right, so if you look at the financials that you're gonna see next month in the mud packets, you'll see that the utilities, being electrical, is about 700,000 under budget at this point. So going back to your question on the 10% aside, if we did add 10% on rolling 12, you're gonna see a decrease in that line item. Off that number here, you're talking about adding 300,000 to it, so give or take a $600,000 decrease in electrical usage or cost.
The other thought is if we're in a drought and we end up pumping quite a bit of water, that shows up in.
I just want to understand the rationale of adding the 10%, that's all. I know it, but I'm just curious where that came from, that's all. You give me the answer.
So the next one, we're going to talk chlorine. It's one of the main drivers of the chemical budget. Sort of what I was talking about with the drought. So we're looking at chlorine and the cost here, and you're seeing that there's obviously during a drought, you have a lot more water usage, and so therefore you have a lot more chlorine usage. So similar, but a little bit different than the utilities. At the top, you see the current FY24 budget. Below that, you see the rolling 12. The plan going forward, as we've done for many years, is we're going to look at the 12-month average of all the chemical usage. And I have plus 5 to 7%. This time of year is when we start talking to our suppliers and seeing what they're going to be changing their prices. If they're going to hold it steady for a year, if they're going to increase it, whatever it may be. Preliminary discussions with them have said they're going to increase it somewhere between 5 and 7%. Over the next 2 months, those discussions should be done. We should get a number. And then if they go up 1%, hold it, whatever it is, if they increase, that's going to go directly back into the budget. So if they say we're holding steady, you'll likely see the same number next year. So it's strictly based off that contract we have with the suppliers. All right, next. O&M projects. These are items bring it up ahead of schedule. So televising the gravity mains for $100,000. This is something that we do about every 5 years. Last time it was done around 2018, 2019. At that time, we looked at a very large portion of the Woodlands to actually figure out which lines were looking to be rehabbed. From that big study called the STAR program in 2018, 2019, we got 5 miles of gravity mains that are currently in your project plan to be rehabbed starting in 25. Next year's project plan that you're going to see in a month or so, we've pushed those out to 26 because we need to do a condition assessment of those lines. Send a camera down there, see what the lines look like, see if starting in 2026 is appropriate or if we should push them off a few more years. And so that's what the televising gravity mains is. 5 miles for $100,000. Senate Bill 3 requirements. So Senate Bill 3 came from Winter Storm Uri a few years ago. There was a bill, obviously Senate Bill 3, that was introduced. It was passed, said you have to do some certain things. Those things were done. Well, in December of 23, a couple months ago, TCQ staff made some staff initiated initiatives that got approved by their board. And so that changes not the entirety of Senate Bill 3, but it does change some various segments of how you maintain generators, how often you have to change the oil and various things like that. So we've done a review through it. It does require the development of plans. There could be some waivers, things like that. So this would be to have a consultant that comes on board that dealt with a lot of the Senate Bill 3 stuff with us and multiple others before, and see if we can get a waiver around some of those requirements so we do not have to do all the maintenance they're asking. Our biggest thing is during Winter Storm Uri, we did not have any issues in the Woodlands, as y'all know. And so we have the proof behind us to say, hey, we don't need to do all these. This is our regiment. Let us stick to it.
The,
Questions?
the condition-based testing,
Mhm.
HDR, will they participate in this televised?
No, that's entirely staff driven.
And this 150, what does that represent of the total O&M? Are these just 2 projects you pulled out, or is it short funds?
Those are just above and beyond. These are just additional ones. So these will be included in the normal budget, but the professional services item for Senate Bill 3 will be increased slightly for that. And then the televising of gravity mains will be in a lower lines and valves budget item. So you'll see an increase. These are things that we know because we've talked about over the last 2-3 months. Figured I'll let y'all know now. There's likely to be others. We need some water model updates for about 20,000. And those items we talk about more directly in April when we present the budget.
When you look at, you add the cost of cooling and utilities, they're your 2 big variable costs. Right? And you have your budget, high, and you look at a rounding number, if it's like 60% or 50 cents of dollars debt, 25% is kind of semi-fixed expenses like head salary and stuff like that. And then we have 25% that's variable costs based on water. So of that variable cost, what percent of that is cooling and utilities when you combine those two?
I don't have those numbers off the top of my head. That's normally something we'll present when we present the draft budget. We'll compare the proposed budget to last year's budget, had a pie chart showing here's chlorine, here's variable, here's debt service, and everything else.
Is that, do you think, just rounding, do you think that's the majority of that pie?
I'm not going to throw a round out there because if it sticks on somebody's head, I'm going to be wrong. So I'll show you in April. Okay. Any other questions? Next item. These are some of the other things that we typically talk about. There's typically been questions from the trustees and much about these. So health and property insurance, actual plus 10%. Staffing is merit 4%, promotions 2%. What that means, just to clarify, that is 6% of the total labor pool for the Woodlands division. That does not mean every person's getting 4%. Doesn't mean everybody's getting promoted for 2%. That is a number that is given out based on performance evaluations of every single employee constantly. So some people may get nothing. Some people may get 5 or 6%. Additional O&M repairs, we're still looking. Manholes need to be coated, valves that need to be installed, so on and so forth. Service contracts, also goods as well. We look at those this time of year. If there's any uniform, trash company, stuff like that, contracts coming up, see what the inflation is going to be, the capital needs, and of course, further evaluate the utilities. Slide, please. All right, so recap. Right now, we're looking at demands consistent with FY 23 and 24. You see it below. We are going to reevaluate those. We are going to look at the water loss, the treatment, production, everything else. Come back, and then surface water blend ratio requested is 50-50 unless I hear otherwise. And by February 26th is when I present that. So kind of quick, no decisions to be made. Y'all, I appreciate y'all asking questions. It gives me ways to think about it in a different way than I've been thinking about it. Come back with better answers next time. So any questions before we move off this subject? All right, that's it for this item. Good. All right, so the next item begins on page 41 in your packet. This item, we bring about every few years, anytime it occurs, not every single year, but of course with the drought year, a couple years in a row, you're going to see this item. This is what resolutions we have for the R&R fund called excess funds, okay? So we bring it every February to the trustees and the MUDs, and the trustees vote on this in March of every year. Following previous direction from what we've always done is we bring you the options that are laid out in the contract. So that contract says, or the resolution says, that with these excess funds, the MUD or the trustees have the ability to either have that money refunded to the MUDs, which I'll get to in a minute, or vote to allow the River Authority to keep it, and basically we identify the projects to keep it on. So you have about 9 pages here that goes through and says, if you want it, well, how we came up with the excess funds, if y'all keep it, how much would go back to y'all? And then you have about 7 pages going through the various projects. If you allowed us to keep it, what those projects funds would be used for. So start off with, first page is pretty much just goes through contract sections, everything else. The big number that everybody wants to hear, it's 5.1 million is the excess funds and change from FY 23. So we have to wait 90 days, or excuse me, 180 days, 6 months after the end of the budget to make sure that 1, the annual comprehensive financial report is done, and 2, per resolution, that our revenues are above 90%. So that date is roughly March 1st.
So the excess funds in the condo division.
No, these are excess funds in the Woodlands division.
Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. What is it?
Yeah, anything GRP related excess funds has, not talked about. That's conversation for another day. It's just, I know those two get confused quite a bit, but this 5.1 million is solely Woodlands division and is solely trustees vote on what happens to them.
I'd just like to make a comment.
Yeah.
So in my mind, we're getting questions about, the excess funds that are in GRP. It's been a topic in multiple meetings, and, I would like to see, a presentation that includes this 5 million and whatever is in GRP. I think we should look at it concurrently and understand what, what funds are we sitting on, 5 plus 40 in the GRP, or I'm putting a number out there, but I like calculating between legal fees and the drought generation, I get a big number.
So you have people, members of the public asking you
No,
about
I have members
excess.
of my board asking. This is a favorite topic of the board. I'm on. In my board,
You brought it up several times.
what's that?
I think you brought it up.
No, usually it's Fred. It's Fred, and so I'm just responding to what happened last budget meeting.
Yeah, your last meeting, the board did discuss wanting to get clarification on the GRP surplus.
We are working on answers to that.
As we don't have the actual report on.
We presented a draft to our finance committee in December. They asked us to go back and look at it again. There, initially, we were asking that we take 12 million out of the excess funds to pay down debt to defease bonds, put 10 million in the GRP R&R fund in addition to what's already there. And then the rest would be to help, say, balance the cost of running the GRP. But they asked us to go back and look at it. And we've got a meeting scheduled in the next week or so to talk internally and then come back to our finance committee with a recommendation. So until we're ready to, till the finance committee says, yes, we're not at liberty to present information.
That's enough.
But yes, there is a fair amount of money, which is contrast to years ago when we were down to our low 200,000.
All right, so back to something y'all can vote on. Excess funds, Woodlands division, 5.1 million. Y'all will vote in March on this item, okay? So fast forward a little bit. Page 43 shows the calculation. Let y'all read that, and if you have questions, you can ask them next week, or if you've read it before and have questions today, but that is the calculation that was reviewed with the audit committee to come to the conclusion of 5.1 million. Page 44 shows the percentage of water sales in 2023, which would base we would base the refunds off of per the resolution. So in making your decision, trying to put all the information in front of you, page 44, refund to the MUDs, each MUD would get that amount. Keep in mind, the River Authority serves 11 MUDs in the Woodlands, not just this trustee board and these MUDs. We also serve 386. So at the end of the day, when I say the votes by the trustees, if it ends in a tie here, 386 breaks the vote because there are 11 MUDs in the Woodlands. So This same information goes to y'all and 386 to make sure everything's fair across the board. Questions so far?
This isn't an all or nothing, right? I mean,
It
because,
could be parted out.
okay.
When we established this fund, it was $300,000.
So
Now it's 2 million.
if the trustees decide and said, hey, River Authority, y'all can keep the funds. I'm gonna go, starting on page 41, go high level on some of these items. There's 1 page per each of these items later on. I'm not gonna go through tonight, but if you have questions, I'll cover them next week or let Eric know and he'll get them to us. First one is a contractual items, the emergency reserve. It was originally started at $2 million. It has a basically an ENR engineering CPI that is tied to. It says it should increase each year by the difference of that amount. We have not done that because the interest in the account has allowed it to grow and keep up with that. Last couple of years, that has not kept up with that. So this request is to take that emergency reserve from about 2.2 million up to 2.6 at the bottom of page 41. That's a contractual item that will just move the money from operating over to this emergency reserve. Page 42 at the top, item number 2 is the AC water line condition assessment. This was discussed quite a bit at the end of last year. This was requested by some of the MUDs and discussed with all the MUDs to see if they're in favor going forward. The scope is being prepared. The scope will be handed out once it is done. Some MUDs have asked to see that, so that y'all will definitely be able to see that. The estimated cost for this MUD requested item is 1.6 million. That does include destructive testing, non-destructive testing, the engineering, the analysis, and a prioritization of AC water line replacements going forward, and 1 PVC line, which is that Woodlands Parkway line. Also, the way this is set up, this is not a phased approach of 1, 2, 3. When looking at it, we had talked before about it being about $1 million. 1.6 million gets you assessment of all the AC water lines in the Woodlands and gives you a projection to replace them all going forward.
And that, was that number developed when this information got?
Yes. They're actually the ones who gave it to us. They, it's about $1 million. I'll include it on the HDR side with their engineering and non-destructive testing. And it's give or take 600,000 for the destructive testing, the excavations and everything else. So that number came from them. Item number 3, town center water line easements. As you know, that project is on hold, but at some point in time, it will kick off again. Since design is done, or nearing completion, we are currently underway to identify the easements that are needed because that line did not always traverse inside the easement itself. So we need to write those easements, make sure the line is in the easement, as well as where we need to realign the easement with the proper roads as the picture shows in the backing. We need new easements. So the 1.5 million here is to get permanent easements by land today for other people pick it up, as well as temporary construction easements when construction does start.
Chris, does it make sense to think of the temporary versus permanent easements differently? Because temporary, I assume, is for the construction, like you just said. If the construction got pushed off, then maybe you don't need that. The permanent is obviously for your need, forever. So
Right.
you think about them a little differently? Those two,
We did
because there's some
talk-
differences down there in your detailed page, right?
Right. Dan and I talked quite a bit about that. And what we're looking for is when you get the temporary easement, you can set a longer date out than there. So at this point, rather than having somebody else go in there and get in that area and buy that land and have to go over here and get the easement for this person, we looked at it and said, if we can go and get everything at one time, all the contracts are in place, we're done for now. We're not gonna have to go back in the future to redo it. Is that your concern?
I just asking if you look at the permanent easement cost and the money spent and the time, not that you need that anyway, whether you do the project or not. The project's driving the temporary side. So
What is the expiration on the temporary construction easements?
As far as I know, you said it,
We can set it for 2 years, we can set it for 5 years, we can set it for 10 years.
Seems like you just pick whatever the time frame is you think that's more than enough.
Mhm.
And then get it all done at once, like you say.
and it's.
Otherwise, you're gonna renegotiate with some new owners out
Some new
there.
owner, if there's land sales, if there's new easements that are put in, somebody else, cable company gets there first, I don't allow it. There's a lot of unknowns. So right now we know it's there. We're saying let's go ahead and go forward with it rather than putting it in a bond later on.
So you're expressing the need for a permanent.
permanent and temporary construction.
So permanent's about 1 million and the temporary is about 5, about 1/3 and 2/3 roughly.
Yeah.
That's based on your information on page
Yeah.
47.
At the bottom table, yes.
Yeah.
Next item 4, wastewater treatment plant number 2, grid classifier. This is part of it. This was part of an existing project that's underway, wastewater plant 2 headworks rehab. That project came in quite a bit over budget and was projected to be over budget. So we elected to postpone this project and put it in a future fiscal year. At this point, it's planned for FY25. And so what we're looking at is to complete this project and get the grid classifier put back in as originally designed to the facility and take roughly 1.2 million. So with this item, since it is already preliminary engineering is already done, it is a true need because it was originally designed to the facility. Rather than put it in next year's budget, potentially increase the rates, we're just seeing to basically pre-fund this now. Next item number 5 is 242's TxDOT required line moves. So TxDOT, as most people know, is widening the road. They're doing some detention ponds, some storm drainage work. And so as part of that, we do have water lines. We have 4 water lines that are in the way of their storm drains and detention. And so since we're in the right of way, we're not in a dedicated easement. The moving of those lines is on our dime. And so the number that you see here that I have listed on there, 353,000 and change, that does, round up basically to take all of the excess funds if everything else is approved, is above it is approved. The remainder of that project, roughly 47,000, would be from the O&M funds currently on hand. High level overview, but you have the information if you want a full refund. You have the information if you want a lot of money to stay with the authority. If there is a request from the trustees to look at some partial disbursement of the funds, partial refund, we'll need to know that because this does come back to your board next month. Ran through it pretty quick. Didn't want to keep you all here on out on Valentine's night, so today, whatever it is.
Chris, which ones of these items would need to be in next year's budget if they weren't approved here?
Good question. So item number 1, we'd look to put in next year's budget. Item number 2, if the management budget did want to go forward with the AC water lines, would be in next year's budget. Item number 3, we would look to put it in the budget, but I'm sure there would be discussion on that. Item number 4 will definitely be, and number 5 would go in this year's budget. And if we're going to be over too far and don't have the revenue to cover it, we may have to come to the notes. Essentially,
Every other, it's gonna be there. Either we
one or the other, and that's one of the
keep it
things.
or we just pay it next year.
That's one of those things.
Higher rate next year.
Correct. Or delay other maintenance projects that are looked at. Any other questions? All right. Y'all have anything, please let Eric know. We'll go from there.
Thank you, Mr. Meeks.
Thank you.
Okay, we're now to agenda item 10. Discuss potential funding alternatives for Woodlands water MUDs related to SJRA Woodlands Division proposed infrastructure projects. General Manager Peterson.
Financial advisor and Brian to work through the financial analysis that we mentioned last month. And we expect to have that completed for presentation at the March meetings. Excuse me.
Good. Okay. Agenda item 11, consider an act on endorsement of Imelda Diaz to the Regional Flood Planning Group as the upper watershed representative. Unfortunately, Trustee Gaynor isn't here to give the full backstory, if you would. Stephanie gave an excellent introduction to this. I guess as opposed to becoming overly verbose, I mean, are there any questions that anyone has based upon what they've read and why she, I guess, should or should not be have our endorsement to fill this position? Just a little bit of the backstory.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask. What's the process to get?
Well,
For select-
for the committee, the executive committee of Region 6. So it's a bit of a long story. I mean, we didn't even have if you remember, it came before this board. We didn't even have an upper watershed representative. We were able to get, first of all, get that seat recognized by Region 6. And then Mr. Gaynor gained the seat. And this entire Region 6 planning group was just beginning. And so a lot of the things that they did were in Trustee Gaynor's field of expertise. Let's call it phase 1 type stuff. Well, now we're moving into, as Stephanie said, moving into the implementation and gaining funding for some of these projects and what have you. And Trustee Gaynor stepped back and said, I'm not really the best person for this. And Miss Diaz came up, her name came up. I believe you brought it forward. If you hadn't taken the opportunity to to watch the YouTube video, that there was a link put in the packet for an interview that was conducted a few years ago with Miss Diaz, to just give you a little better feel for her professionalism and her high quality. I met with her personally, and she's an exceptional professional. And I mean, there's a lot of backstory too. It's an American success story.
Yeah.
And I don't think we could find anybody better based upon what she's done and how she's done it. So
could there be several people that are nominated or put up for consideration?
you probably know the process better than I do, Stephanie.
Whoever desires to, in their application, will apply and go before the executive committee in an interview process to see who's so ultimately selected.
A pretty open process is what you're describing, right?
Right.
And this would be just kind of our
This would
recommendation.
be
that we
our
have
endorsement.
Endorsement of, okay, got it.
What's the website? What's the website for this Indy Region 6?
So if the,
Isn't it through the Texas Water Development Board though? Yeah, that's the base where you can start, and then you'd go to the different flood planning groups. No, she is not.
position represents the entire upper watershed.
And then the upper watershed is,
It's
Same Center River.
And then it ends at Cypress Creek. So it's a pretty large area. And then
is she a resident of Montgomery County?
she's in Harris County,
In Harris County?
and her address is on her resume as well. So you can-
It's a Spring, Texas.
So the alternative would be, you know, that I do not endorse her, and that's fine, but then who would we endorse? Would we want to show, you know, some kind of voice there, because it is a large population in the Woodlands, and she is going to be
We
represented.
were also instrumental in getting the seat for the upper watershed, this board. I wouldn't say we did it all, but we were instrumental.
When does it get done? What's the timing on this? Is it imminent?
Next meeting, from what I understand with Dr. Gaynor is they're gonna be placing it for advertisement, so the first week of March would be when they're advertising.
You say advertising, what do you mean by that? These are all volunteer positions, right?
Advertising, we just, you know, I'll make a call, if we have an open position, who wants to apply?
I guess that's standard in the Texas Water Development Board. That's just procedure, process, protocol.
Can I ask why the board would not endorse her? She thinks they have all of the qualifications and I don't really feel like you can.
I mean, if everyone's questions are answered, I'll certainly make a motion to that this board endorse Imelda Diaz as the Texas Water Development Board Regional Flood Planning Group Upper Watershed Representative. Can I get a second? for that? Can I get an amen? There we go. Thank you. So we have a motion, we have a second. Is there further discussion on this matter? All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstain? Thank you very much. Okay. Receive the attorney's report. Board Attorney Brian Yates. Good evening, sir.
26 positions that are up in the Woodlands. 5 of those are open. We have 21 incumbents so far who have filed to run. We have 19 non-incumbents for a total so far of 40 candidates, 26 positions. That equates to 7 of our 10 districts so far have contested elections. Deadline to submit an application is this Friday. The deadline for a candidate who has submitted an application to withdraw is next Friday. So we'll know by next Friday for sure how many contested elections we have in Woodlands. The candidate ballot drawing will be on that following Monday, which I believe is the 26th. We'll be conducting here as we have in the past. That's the rundown on the election. Happy to answer questions if y'all have them.
Thank you. Okay, agenda item 13, receive the general manager's report. General Manager Peterson.
All right, just have a couple items to cover. One was to give you an update on our progress with Vertex One and the conversion over. We are moving along. We're going through some training with staff right now. Something that I wanted to bring to your attention that is a little bit of a change. We, as part of the migration process from the old software to the new software that's already underway, there needed to be essentially 5 data migration transfers from our current data in the software we have to the new data or the new software. As we get closer to the go live, those become the duration between each one becomes very short. So the last one was essentially it's kind of a final test before the final. When we went into this project, we identified that that we believed that we could attempt to do this ourselves. Marine was working on it for the first migration, brought in Hark to help do that. Found out that we really don't have the manpower and expertise at this point to do the additional 4 migrations, particularly in the time frame that we're going to need to do them in order to do the go live. So there are consultants that do this specifically. We've reached out to Vertex to get some information or some particular companies that do this. We've spoken with them and we're going to be moving forward with hiring that consultant to help us with the remaining 4 data migrations. It will be a cost to the MUDs of about $9,600 for each MUD, and that'll be spread over about the next 6 months. So that's something that was a little bit of a change. The original buyback of the whole program was, if you'll recall, about 2.2 years. This would extend it with that additional to about 2.4 years. So not too much of a difference, but we feel it's critical to the success of the overall migration and the overall switchover. Particularly, we can't have any hiccups, particularly right there at the end when we're about to go live and go live. So just wanted to bring that to your attention because it was a change. And we'll work hard diligently to make sure that we try to fit that within the budget. It's not a budgeted item, but that's. The only other thing, maybe some good news, which was a budgeted item, is we have entered into an agreement with a contractor to address the roof issues on this building. So we're a lot of applause within the building, at least from staff that, right. And well, there's more things that we've fixed here recently since last week's flood or rain that you don't see today, but the building's still leaking pretty good. So we will hopefully have some movement on that soon. So that was a budgeted item. So that's all I actually had tonight.
Questions? Okay, agenda item 14, receive staff or ad hoc committee updates on the following. The Personnel Committee did not meet, so there's no report from that committee. Audit and Finance, Trustee Wilson.
We met with the auditors on the annual report as already discussed, and we had a meeting with SDRA as Chris laid out on the first pass of the information that you saw tonight. So, and a meeting, I think, in the next month for a second pass with SDRA.
Okay, the Public Education Committee meeting did meet this afternoon at 4 o'clock. Trustee Gaynor, it was just as here, he is unavailable to attend. The meeting was an in-depth discussion about the Holloway contract and some of the language in it. You know, anything you want to share, Eric?
Yeah. Holloway, just I can do it real quick. You can add on.
I'll chime in. Yeah.
Sure. Holloway, over the last 60 days has done an assessment of SDRA and WWA's current protocols, what outlets we're using, how we're communicating with the public, what's worked, and they've done an assessment of all that. With that and with input from us, they built a draft, what they call a strategic plan, and that lays out more of a conceptual idea of how we would go about communicating to the public, what input we would get, who would do what other groups we might need. Just a lot of really just the framework for what the campaign might look like. And so we really dug into that today. It just came out yesterday, so we hadn't had a whole lot of time to dissect it, but Hugh had spent a good bit of time and we kind of went through his comments today, and we'll be giving them our comments over the next week, and they'll be finalizing that over the next few weeks.
The other thing, John Geiger gave a pretty detailed report about the great success that we're having with our virtual media platforms that are going on. The responses are continuing to rise regularly, and the content in them is much appreciated by the viewing public. He does good work, and the public is appreciative of it. That struck with me.
I think one of the highlights was the weekly water email is being opened by almost 60% of the people that it's going to, which is huge. I think the SGRA folks were like, this is incredible, and how do you do that, right? So
for perspective, just industry average would be 20 to 30% lower.
Yeah.
In the 30s or so. So significantly higher open rate than is normal.
Yes. In summary, the Public Education Committee is doing good work, and they're continuing to do so.
Yeah, gonna get really busy.
We're gonna get really busy. Yeah. Any further questions or comments required? Anything to add? Good. Session? No open session. Discuss matters for placement on future agendas. I had one that came up earlier to put the reinstitution of the Woodlands Township One Water. What was it? Task Force is what it was called. And whether that name remains, but that concept, just the one water, which is a nationwide term. So that should be on there. I also had the SJRA Woodlands Division March excess funds as being an agenda item. Did I miss anything? Is there anything else that anybody happen to notice or wants to be on next month's agenda? Last chance. Adjourn the meeting. Thank you.